In the dim chill of Newton Federal Courthouse, where marble columns echoed footsteps and silence rang louder than voices, 76-year-old Colonel Elias Ford sat handcuffed on a wooden bench outside holding cell B. He wore his deep blue Air Force dress uniform with a quiet dignity, no longer fitted to his age, but pressed with precision. His face, lined and weathered, held no protest, only the calm of a man who had waited in darker places with less certainty. The room paid no attention. Not the bailiff who passed him. Not the officer who left his coffee on the floor beside him. He wasn't resisting. He was remembering. The hallway lights hummed faintly, casting long shadows on the tile. Elias's shoes, once mirror-polished, now dulled at the edges, rested firmly on the floor, heels aligned like a man still answering roll call. Behind the heavy oak door, a judge's voice carried faintly through thick walls. Somewhere down the corridor, a phone rang, then stopped. No one looked his way. He had become, in that moment, a fixture, a curiosity at best, a dismissed old man at worst. His hands, cuffed loosely in front of him, rested on his lap. Liver spots dotted his skin. Scars crisscrossed the backs of his fingers, remnants of something no one in this courthouse had likely earned the right to ask about. He sat still. No plea for help. No sign of confusion or shame. Just stillness, and breath, and the occasional blink, like a man listening for signals in silence. Outside, rain began to tap against the windows. Inside, Elias Ford waited. Not to be freed. But to be seen. The skies above Soviet airspace were the kind of blue that defied imagination, too vast, too cold, too unforgiving. At 72,000 feet, the world curved into its own quiet infinity, and Lieutenant Elias Ford, then barely 30, sat strapped into a pressure suit inside a jet black U-2 variant with no tail number, no country, no name. The mission designation was Sentinel Flare 9. The route? Classified. The objective? Unconfirmed even to him. He only knew the altitude, the timing, and the margin for error, none. He'd been handpicked after Langley noticed a curious set of aptitudes, fluency in Russian, near photographic memory, an ability to hold his breath for over 4 minutes. He was the kind of man who could vanish in plain sight, whose blood ran cold in panic situations, and whose silence could be trusted with truths so volatile they'd never appear in any national archive. His induction into Sentinel Flare had begun with a burned file and ended with a simulated crash in Arizona. As far as the world was concerned, Elias Ford had died in 1963. In truth, he had lived more lives than most. He'd slept in foxholes carved from Laotian clay, flown under radar nets in East Germany, and cracked codes relayed via dead drop in Romanian safehouses. His first kill had been a silent one, up close. His last, a misfire that left his spotter dead beside him, his blood soaked into the map coordinates still gripped in Elias's hand. The cost of discretion was measured not in medals but in memories too dangerous to recount. In 1969, during a mission to photograph experimental railguns outside Omsk, Elias's plane took fire from an unmapped SAM battery. The U-2 was hit, losing thrust at the edge of glide altitude. His co-pilot, Alonzo Page, screamed over the intercom as the cockpit filled with smoke. Elias ordered no ejection. He banked hard, coasted the crippled aircraft into a planned descent across the Kazakh steppe, and triggered an onboard self-destruct on landing. They walked 92 miles across frozen ground before exfiltration. Their debriefing was 2 hours long. It ended with silence, a hand on the shoulder, and a new mission file. Years later, in Berlin, the Cold War carved into his personal life. His wife, Lotte, an embassy translator, grew weary of secrets, of sudden absences, of coded remarks that made intimacy feel like interrogation. One night, after Elias failed to return for their anniversary dinner, she left a note and boarded a plane to Oslo. She took their daughter, Julia. The next morning, Elias opened his apartment door to a quiet stillness more brutal than a gunshot. She had asked nothing of him but honesty. He had none to give. Through all of it, he bore the burden of a service disavowed. No medals. No reunions. No published commendations. Only scars, one a long pink slash from shoulder to wrist, another a pinched nerve from ejecting over Cambodia. The world had moved on from the shadows he walked in. But Elias had not. The loyalty instilled in him was marrow deep, unshakable. His name would never be etched into stone. But the lives he protected stood as monuments in motion. In the 80s, as satellites took over most recon duties, Elias was transferred to ground-based operations. His passport changed again. This time, he was Dr. Ethan Fuller, consultant for an international logistics firm. In reality, he oversaw the smuggling of defectors through Central Europe. Some nights he slept in crates with false bottoms. Other nights he posed as a political envoy and shook hands with the same men he had once tracked from rooftops through a sniper scope. By 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, Sentinel Flare was quietly shuttered. Officially, it had never existed. Its agents were dispersed, identities reburied, records dissolved in coded vaults. Elias received an unmarked envelope with a train ticket, a set of dental records, and instructions to grow a beard. He took the train. He followed the orders. Then he waited. He bought a small farmhouse in Vermont. Read newspapers like they were novels. Started baking bread. Relearned how to laugh, cautiously, around neighbors who found him quiet but polite. Every Sunday, he wrote a letter to his daughter and never mailed it. He stored them in a box under his bed. When she turned 40, he finally sent the first one. No reply came. Still, he wrote again. He never returned to D.C. until this year. The VA had requested an update on a clerical error, something about benefits eligibility. Elias drove down himself, in his old Buick. On the way, he stopped by a diner in Winchester and ordered 2 coffees, one of which he left untouched across from him. The waitress asked if he was waiting on someone. He said yes. But no one came. The day of his arrest began with a routine deposit. A check from an Air Force trust, dated, official, and valid, was flagged by the teller. She seemed nervous. Elias offered ID, then his credentials. She stared at the insignia on his jacket but didn't ask. Within 10 minutes, the manager was called. Then security. Elias could feel the weight of assumptions gathering like weather. He didn't argue. He didn't panic. When the officers came, he rose without needing instruction. One glanced at his lapel and asked if he got the uniform at a costume store. Another patted him down with exaggerated flair, as if he expected spy gear or explosives. They cuffed him too tightly. He said nothing. At the station, they asked questions. Why so many aliases? Why a fake name on the trust? Why hadn't he contested the suspicion? He responded softly, "You wouldn't believe the answer." No one believed him anyway. By the time he was transferred to Newton's courthouse, the story was already being forgotten. The incident was logged as an elderly fraud attempt. A curious footnote. A harmless old man playing soldier. But Elias had lived long enough to know, sometimes, the world forgets not because it's cruel, but because remembering requires the courage to face what it never understood. And so, he waited, not for rescue. Not for apology. But for the moment the world might finally ask the right question. The file sat forgotten on the corner of Officer Derek Malloy's desk, buried beneath a clipboard and half a sandwich. Elias Ford's arrest report, bare bones, hastily typed, listed the charges as suspicious transaction, potential elder impersonation, and failure to provide adequate documentation. Derek, 24 and 2 years out of the academy, had filed it under the wrong case number. The system miscategorized it as a misdemeanor financial fraud, a forgettable nuisance amid a morning of drunk and disorderly calls and petty thefts. No one noticed. No one double-checked. The bank teller, a young woman named Reina Morales, had hesitated even as she made the call. She'd felt a twinge of guilt. The check had come from a Department of Defense subsidiary. She recognized the seal. But the name? Elias Ford? She'd run it against a local registry and found nothing. Then the uniform. Too pressed, too pristine. A man his age, with eyes that sharp, didn't look like someone who needed charity. He looked like someone testing boundaries. Or so she told herself. Her manager hadn't helped. Call it in, he'd said. Better safe than sued. In truth, Reina had acted by the book. But the book was brittle. Written for systems that never imagined a man like Ford could fall through its pages. At the courthouse, Elias was moved into holding cell B, his cuffs removed but not his dignity. He sat still as a court officer mumbled instructions he barely registered. Outside the frosted glass, Malloy and his partner, Officer Tyrese Lamont, discussed their afternoon route over coffee. They didn't mention Elias. They didn't need to. To them, he was a harmless relic, a cautionary tale, maybe, but not a threat worth their attention. Hey, did you see that badge he had? Tyrese asked, half laughing. Looked like something out of a war movie. Probably got it off eBay, Derek replied. I saw a guy last month with fake NASA wings claiming to be Apollo crew. They chuckled. Behind them, Elias sat with his eyes closed, memorizing the rhythm of the building's intercom buzzers and the mechanical groan of a distant elevator. But not everyone ignored him. Down the hallway, Clerk Miriam DeSoto hesitated when she opened his intake file. Something didn't feel right. She'd grown up in a Navy family. Her uncle had served with Joint Special Operations. She recognized the triangular flash on Elias's collar tab, a tiny, worn insignia almost invisible against the dark blue wool. It was no standard rank marker. It was a code. She searched the internal archives and found nothing. She tried again, this time through the interagency portal reserved for veteran verification. Nothing. Miriam was good at patterns, and what struck her wasn't what she found, it was what she didn't. The gaps. The redacted history. The blank years from 1961 to 1985. It didn't make sense. Most dishonorably discharged vets still had a footprint. But Ford's record looked like it had been vacuumed clean. She started a second request, drafting an interdepartmental inquiry flagged as unusual record inconsistency, veteran docket. She debated submitting it. Her supervisor, jaded by a career of bureaucratic indifference, waved it off. Just another guy playing dress-up, he muttered. Move the file. It's already docketed. But Miriam didn't delete the draft. She saved it, encrypted it, and quietly uploaded it to a dormant referral node she'd learned about during a cybersecurity workshop, a backdoor server used by government employees during internal whistleblower trainings. It wasn't supposed to be active anymore. But it pinged green. Elsewhere, the world moved on. In the lobby of the Newton courthouse, a local news crew was setting up to film a segment about courthouse renovations. Their intern, a quiet young man named Jason, noticed the old man in the glass cell. He zoomed his lens for a frame, just out of curiosity. What he saw stopped him cold. The uniform wasn't just old, it was real. The ribbons, the insignia. He didn't know what they meant, but they looked heavy. Important. He snapped 2 shots before a bailiff stepped into view, blocking the camera. Hey, don't film down here. That's holding, the bailiff barked. Jason nodded, apologetic, but curiosity took root. Later, in the editing bay, he'd zoom in again. Look up a few of the pins. They'd lead him to military forums. Then government seals. Then fragments of declassified testimony buried in congressional appendices. But that would come later. For now, Elias sat in silence. It was cold and holding cell B. Not freezing. Just enough to make him feel small in a room too white, too square, too loud with nothingness. A janitor passed by, pushing a mop bucket. He paused for a moment, then squinted. "You serve?" he asked. Elias looked up, just a flick of his chin. "A lifetime ago." The janitor gave a respectful nod. "My brother flew C-130s out of Thule. Said they used to call the high flyers ghost birds. Ever hear that?" Elias smiled, faintly. "I knew a few." That was it. The janitor moved on. Somewhere, an alarm buzzed. Courtroom 2A was back in session. Elias was still listed for preliminary review. But the judge hadn't yet received his full docket. And due to a recent change in the digital filing software, his case had been pushed into a review queue slated for end-of-day overflow. It meant he'd sit another 3 hours without representation, without a word, in bureaucratic limbo. No phone call had been granted. No contact initiated with next of kin. His public defender had been assigned but was stuck in traffic after a triple homicide intake across town. To the system, Elias was a glitch. A form waiting for a box to be ticked. But outside that system, just outside its reach, something was stirring. A digital node blinked to life on a dark screen in Arlington. An alert. Just one word. Beacon. In Arlington, Virginia, beneath 3 stories of concrete and steel, Lieutenant Commander Hannah Yoon sat at her console inside the Defense Advanced Signals Operations Directorate. Though officially retired, she now worked as lead cybersecurity architect for Project Legacy, a quiet digital net tasked with scanning old Cold War infrastructure for silent ghosts. Most weeks brought nothing. But that morning, her screen lit up with a single ping. Beacon detected. Auth node 207. Status, live. She froze. The code was real. That was impossible. She leaned forward, bypassed the standard protocols, and dropped into Legacy's oldest encrypted channel. The ping had come from a dormant lapel transmitter, an XM-10 unit embedded in Cold War-era identification gear. These had been built for one reason only: to silently flag when a Black Ops agent, presumed buried in cover, was detained by any U.S. authority. That tech had been decommissioned in 1992. Except this one had just come alive. She tapped the metadata. The signal had come from Newton, Massachusetts. The source? Colonel Elias Ford. Hannah's breath caught. That name appeared only in fragments. She'd seen it once, attached to a debrief summary stamped, "Never to be opened without presidential order." Elias Ford was rumored to have led Sentinel flare reconnaissance ops during the darkest days of the Cold War. No one talked about flare anymore, except maybe in whispers among the old guard. If this signal was real, it meant someone the system buried had surfaced. And been arrested. She routed the signal through the closed relay, an unofficial path used by retired flare agents who'd agreed to a silent call-and-response protocol should anyone ever be compromised. She included a single line. Beacon verified. Node 207. Route, Newton. And then the replies came. Receiving. Rolling. Confirm rendezvous. Hannah grabbed her sealed satchel. She had 10 minutes to decrypt the node and prepare for confirmation drop. Thousands of miles away, the message reached its intended recipients. In a farmhouse outside Santa Fe, Lucia Franco, former aircraft systems specialist, opened a dusty crate labeled Tools, and removed a briefcase with 4 federal seals. In Annapolis, a retired drone designer named Bill Tang ended a chess lesson, stepped into his study, and pressed an embedded trigger beneath an old photograph. In a Nevada suburb, Alonzo Page, Elias's co-pilot from Omsk, was making coffee when his encrypted device blinked for the first time in decades. He stared at it. His wife, watching, said simply, "Go." By daybreak, 7 individuals were in motion, answering a call they'd always hoped would never come. None wore uniforms. They wore resolve. At the Newton Federal Courthouse, Elias Ford remained in holding cell B. His hands were still, his gaze fixed on nothing and everything. He knew the cell was monitored. He also knew who might be watching. If the beacon had worked, if they still remembered, then wheels were already turning. He thought of Alonzo. Of the long walk across frozen plains. Of the days when the only proof of survival was another day. He thought of his daughter. Wondered if she'd kept the locket. Outside the courthouse, 3 black vehicles moved past the security checkpoint with silent, effortless clearance. They bore no markings. Their plates didn't register on local databases. The guards let them pass before realizing they hadn't spoken. The first to emerge was Alonzo, slower now, his gait unsteady, but his stare just as firm. A woman in a crisp navy coat followed, her badge turned inward but gleaming. It was Commander Hannah Yoon. A third figure, taller, carried a sealed case marked DIA, Declassified Order 57A. Inside, Clerk Miriam DeSoto received a message on her screen. Holding status confirmation, Ford, Elias. Compliance immediate. The message vanished. Outside cell B, the door unlocked with a soft click. The guards didn't move. One had just taken a call, from someone he couldn't name, only obey. Alonzo stepped in first. Elias looked up and blinked once. "You got old," he said. "You didn't," Alonzo replied. Commander Yoon followed. "Colonel Ford," she said, formal but respectful. "You are being transferred under Article 17 of Project Legacy. You are no longer under local jurisdiction." Elias stood slowly. His knees ached, but his bearing never changed. They moved together through the quiet halls. No one stopped them. No one dared. The veterans passed through the lobby. Whispers began. Phones came out. A press intern from the courthouse renovation segment fumbled to capture a shot. He did. It would go viral later. Outside, the convoy waited. Inside, history had just turned over in its sleep. The convoy of 3 unmarked vehicles pulled away from Newton Federal Courthouse in silence. No sirens. No motorcade. Just purpose. The press watched, unsure what they had witnessed. A few took pictures. A few tried to follow. Most stayed rooted, intuition telling them they'd just missed something important. Inside the lead SUV, Elias sat between Commander Yoon and Alonzo Page. Neither spoke. There was no need. The air was thick with shared memory, the kind that didn't need narration. The driver, a young agent with no insignia and eyes that had seen enough, handled the wheel like it was an aircraft yoke. The GPS didn't route to any address. It followed a secure frequency transmitted only once. They arrived 42 minutes later at a black-paneled facility tucked behind a Weather Department of Agriculture sign just north of Andover. The sign was a joke. This was no farming operation. Beneath the structure was a former cold storage archive repurposed by Project Legacy years ago. No paperwork. No entry logs. It didn't exist to anyone who hadn't already bled for it. As Elias stepped out, he saw the others. Lucia Franco, older now, hair grayed but shoulders still square. Bill Tang, with a limp and a soft smile. Nadim El-Farouk, who'd once transmitted coded bursts from beneath a frozen lake. They didn't embrace. They saluted. Inside, they moved quickly. The air buzzed with a precision rhythm. Hallways clicked under boot soles. Elias was escorted into a chamber lined with soundproofing foam and analog terminals, no wireless, no risk. Yoon activated the primary debrief sequence. Colonel Ford, she began, "As of this hour, the circumstances of your detainment have been escalated under federal protective review. Your case file has been transferred to Vault 17 under Level 6 clearance. You are no longer in custody." He nodded, unsurprised. She handed him a document. On it, a header, D.I., Sentinel Flare Posthumous Audit Directive. Elias raised a brow. "Posthumous?" She gave a slight smile. "As far as most agencies are concerned, you died in 1987. We intend to keep it that way. But your name, your record, it's time they were returned. If not to the public, then to the ones who kept the lights on while you were flying in the dark." He looked down at the paper. It was all real now. A confirmation that he had, in fact, existed. He was given tea. Strong. Black. Served without question. He sipped it slowly. Outside the chamber, preparations were underway. 7 case files marked with handwritten designations, OMSK, Laos, Nord Station, Ghost Flight, were being scanned into Legacy's long-classified digital vault. Each file bore the old seal of Sentinel Flare, an open eye inside a circle of wings. Meanwhile, news of the courthouse incident was starting to spread, not as headlines, but as questions. Photos from the press in turn had begun circulating in niche forums. Veterans identified the insignias. The ribbons. The way Elias had carried himself. Military historians took notice. One image, Elias saluting another veteran outside the courthouse, sparked a minor online frenzy. But without names, without confirmation, it remained myth. Until the next day. At the Department of Veterans Affairs, a caseworker named Sylvia Dorman opened a returned benefit packet flagged months ago. It had been redirected to a Ford E with no active record. She noticed a handwritten note inside, unsigned. "I was never gone. You just stopped looking." She read it twice. Then she looked up Elias Ford. Nothing. So she tried Sentinel Flare. That led her to redacted documents, incomplete memos, and one declassified hearing from 2003 mentioning a budget request for covert aerial verification systems. In it, a name appeared only once, E. Ford. Sylvia flagged it. 3 hours later, she was contacted by a voice claiming to be from Historical Compliance. Her terminal locked. Her inbox emptied. The memo vanished. But she remembered the name. Back at the facility, Elias reviewed a tablet displaying a timeline of his missions, ones he hadn't spoken of in decades. They were no longer secrets to him. They were ghosts with names. Yoon stepped beside him. "There's something else," she said. She tapped a button. A screen displayed an image. A boy, 8, maybe 9 years old, standing in front of a model rocket exhibit at the Air and Space Museum. In his hand, a replica U-2 model. On his shirt, a sticker that read, "My grandpa flew higher." Elias froze. Yoon continued, "His mother brought him. Quietly. Through a private tour. She asked if we'd ever honor her father's service without asking questions." Elias reached for the screen, but stopped short. His fingers trembled. "She never replied to my letters," he said softly. "She didn't need to," Yoon replied. "She answered by raising someone who believed." At that moment, the room seemed smaller. Warmer. Less like a vault and more like a memory returned. The next morning, the convoy reassembled. This time, they returned to Newton not in silence, but in ceremony. They walked Elias into the courthouse lobby again. This time, no cuffs. This time, the people stood aside. Lieutenant Commander Yoon addressed the press. She held the sealed DI case in her hands. "This man," she said clearly, "is Colonel Elias Ford. His service to this nation was classified beyond recognition for over 5 decades. Today, under Declassification Order 57A, we recognize him fully. She opened the case. Inside, a flight log, a rusted medal, and a citation dated 1971, stamped with a president's seal. Gasps echoed. Cameras clicked. Someone started clapping. Then everyone did. Elias stood still, his hands at his side, eyes fixed on a boy at the back of the crowd holding a hand-drawn sign. He watched the skies so we could sleep. The boy was his grandson. Elias raised his hand slowly and gave a salute. The boy returned it, clumsy, heartfelt. No words passed between them. None were needed. That night, the story rippled outward, not as a scandal or spectacle, but as something quieter. Something truer. The video of Colonel Elias Ford standing in the courthouse lobby, saluting his grandson, was shared first by a military memorabilia forum. Then a journalist at a local Boston station picked it up. He had served himself, once, in a different war. He noticed the winged insignia on Elias's chest and remembered hearing rumors from a retired pilot in Guam. There were men who flew too high to be found. By midnight, the video had reached over 500,000 views. The caption beneath it read simply, "Sometimes, the forgotten heroes were never forgotten by each other." But even as public curiosity swelled, Elias Ford himself stayed quiet. When news crews appeared at the VA center, he declined comment. When a congressman offered a formal apology, he responded with a single sentence typed on government stationery. No apology can alter history. But recognition can steady it. Back at the Project Legacy facility, the 7 operatives who had come for him met once more in a circular room deep beneath ground. No agenda. No script. Just time. Lucia Franco passed around a rusted compass, one Elias had carried in Laos. It still worked. "We flew missions that didn't exist," she said, holding it gently. "But we were real. We mattered. And now, so does that." Alonzo, seated across from her, stared at a wall lined with old dispatch notes. "You know, I used to think we'd die without anyone ever knowing. I made peace with it. But seeing him again, seeing him walk free? I didn't realize I still needed that." Yoon stood by a terminal, reading an incoming message from the Department of Defense. It confirmed what they already knew: Sentinel Flare's operational logbook had been authorized for partial release. Select missions would be declassified. The names of 24 agents, including Ford's, would be entered into the National Service Archive. One clause, highlighted in bold, read: "Due to operational sensitivity, recognition shall remain symbolic only. No remuneration. No pension adjustment. No honors ceremony unless requested by the operative." No one objected. Recognition wasn't about headlines. Elias was offered an advisory post. He declined. Instead, he requested something different. 2 weeks later, in a quiet wing of the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum, a new exhibit opened with minimal press. It bore no flashy display, no digital effects. Just a glass locker containing a worn blue uniform, a pair of burnt gloves, a flight log with a single entry, and a folded flag without a name tag. The plaque beneath it read, "He flew unseen so others could return. Colonel Elias Ford. U.S. Air Force, Sentinel Flare. Mission accepted." Eyes open. Visitors didn't rush to it. But those who lingered grew still. The silence around the case wasn't emptiness, it was gravity. That same day, in a high school history classroom in Vermont, a teacher pulled up an article titled, "The Veteran We Never Knew." She asked her students what legacy meant. One boy, quiet, reserved, raised his hand. "It means, doing the right thing, even when no one's going to know about it. And then, maybe someday, someone does." The teacher smiled. She had seen the video, too. Elsewhere, Elias began walking each morning around a quiet park near his home. He never wore his medals. But sometimes he wore the old flight jacket with the faded stitching. People nodded. Some approached. One woman brought her son to shake his hand. He always responded the same way: it was a privilege to serve. Not all recognized him. That was fine. The people who mattered did. He wrote letters now. To families of those lost in the operations. Not with details, those were still sealed, but with gestures. One family in Idaho received a folded American flag with a typed note. He flew beside me. He didn't flinch. Neither did you. In a nursing home in Ohio, a man who'd lost 2 fingers in a failed flare extraction wept over a handwritten envelope with a line of code only he would recognize. And in Berlin, an old woman opened her mailbox and found a photograph from 1973, her and Elias beneath the Brandenburg Gate. No note. But she smiled, and for a moment, she was 20 again. Word of Elias's quiet acts spread through veteran networks. His legend shifted, not as a hero, but as a reminder. A reminder that even forgotten chapters still belong in the book. In the last interview he would ever grant, given not to the press, but to a young Air Force cadet who had written him a letter, Elias was asked what he missed most about service. He paused. The silence, he said finally. Not the silence of being hidden. The silence of knowing what you did mattered, and not needing anyone to say so. The cadet wrote those words on the underside of his own helmet. Years later, he'd carry them into the skies over foreign soil. Back in Newton, the courthouse upgraded its intake procedure. Officers now receive training on recognizing military service insignia. A plaque was installed in the lobby, not about Elias, not directly, but inscribed with a quote found in one of his letters. When someone carries the weight for others, it is our duty not to let them carry it alone. Reina Morales, the teller who first flagged the check, reached out. She asked for a meeting. Elias agreed. They met at the park. She apologized. He nodded. You were cautious, he said. You were right to be. We built a world where people like me aren't always believed. But you reached out. That matters more. She didn't speak again. She just sat beside him on the bench. That same afternoon, Elias mailed a package to his grandson. Inside, the compass, a copy of the flight log, and the burned gloves. There was no letter. Only a post-it note. You saw me. That's all I ever needed. Later that week, the boy stood before the museum case with his mother. He didn't say much. But when he looked at the uniform, he whispered something she couldn't hear. A small crowd gathered behind them. And stayed longer than they'd planned. Mission complete.